Okay. All right. We can see each other. We can hear each other. I am here with Maddie Wiener. She is a comedian. I have to tell you, my wife and I, we kind of laugh because we live out here in Freeport, Illinois, which is kind of out in the boonies. We're a small town, only about, 30 some thousand people. And both me and my wife absolutely love stand-up comedy. We love watching it on Netflix, anything we can find on YouTube. But there aren't any comedy clubs out here at all, obviously, because, and we, for the first time in our lives, we went to a comedy club. We went to the Laugh Factory, which ends up an interesting story because it was literally ended up being like, it was in March and it was like right before everything shut down.
Mm.
It was like our last like outing as an experience before like COVID and everything shut down. And it was, I don't know technically what they call it, but it was one of those nights there at the Laugh Factory where it was just one comedian after another. I think each you got like 15 minutes. And you got up there, and I'm not trying to put too fine a point on, but we're by far the funniest one that night. My wife and I
Oh,
just
thanks.
rolled and laughed and laughed, and we couldn't like stop quoting you the whole 2 hour drive back to Freeport, Illinois. It was just
Oh,
absolutely
thank you.
hysterical. And when I told my wife, because we talked about you a couple times since then, when I told my wife you were coming on the podcast, she was really excited, Max. She's kind of upset that I wouldn't let her sit right here next to me and be in on this podcast just because she wanted to hear it. But so first of all, props to you. That was absolutely amazing. So I guess I'll get right into it. Obviously, being a comedian, where did that start for you?
I started in North Carolina when I was like 16 in high school. Um, so yeah, I'm 22 now, so I've been doing it about 6 years. And then yeah, I was in North Carolina for like 3 or 4 years there, and then I've been in Chicago about 4 years now. So yeah, that doesn't add up to six, but something along those lines.
Did you have a point in your childhood where you're like, I like making people laugh. That's kind of fun.
Uh, it's weird because I kind of almost got into stand up on accident. Like there was this open mic night by my house in high school, and I was like, oh, that just seems like a fun way to like kill some time tonight. Like I was like a theater kid and stuff, so I was definitely like had been performing a lot since I was really young. And then I was like, oh, I'll just like give it a shot. And then I met some guys there, two great comics, Kenyon Adamczyk and Sam Prickett, who people should check out. They're really funny. And they were like, oh yeah, there's like this whole scene here, like you should come. And they kind of like showed me the ropes of like this whole North Carolina scene. And then like 3 months into doing that, I was like, oh, this is what's up. And then I kind of just stuck with it. Now it's like definitely my thing. Now it's much more intentional, but
I always think it's kind of an interesting question, because some of the few comedians that I've talked to, or I should say listen to, I spend the majority of time listening to comedians, and I especially enjoy some of those podcasts that are by comedians that have another comedian on, and they kind of get into the discussion of the science of comedy. Um, it's always interesting to me how some comedians will go on and on about how their dad was hilarious or their mom was hilarious growing up, and you got other ones who are like, no, neither one of my parents were funny, and yet somehow whichever angle they come from, they're obviously funny people or they wouldn't be doing stand-up comedy. which
mm,
which end of the spectrum on that were you?
I don't know. My parents or my dad especially is like very funny. So I guess there's that. Yeah, my dad's funny. My dad has like a very dark sense of humor. But I don't know because it is weird that you like hear so many different comedians like the quote unquote reasons why people are funny seem to be so different, and then like the the and then people's types of humor are so different too. So it's like interesting to see like, oh, that can be born out of like anything. And like I don't know, I think sometimes people think of it as kind of like limiting, where it's like, I mean, I also I don't mean to stand up on a pedestal and be like, where did I get this fabulous gift? Like I'm not really anybody, but like but it is interesting to be like, oh, why are people like drawn to this thing that's like a kind of like, I don't know, like a weird lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so weird because like I don't know, once you like when I started doing comedy, it was the most like eclectic group of people I've ever met, just across everything, across age and race and gender and like hobbies and lifestyle. Like I feel like it really like attracts a lot of different like types of people, and like especially like look like I don't know, I like love local comedy scenes. It's like such a fun like I think a lot of people don't know that they even exist. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
started, I was kind of like, oh, you do like two open mics and then you're like Whitney Cummings or something. And it's like, no, there's like this whole world of like I don't know. Local comedy is just like, it's like some of the weirdest fucking people I've ever met in my life. Like, and it's awesome.
Well, it's cool. You kind of, and I'm again speaking at this from the outside, but you kind of get the feeling that it's almost kind of like a, God, and I hate to be sexist here, but almost like a brotherhood. Like, people who get to know each other and, work together a lot. And it's always interesting when you come across those situations where you'll have two comedians who are pretty famous who seem like they're almost on opposite ends of the spectrum, and then they'll get talking to be like, oh yeah, actually they've known each other for 20 years. They used to work in the Boston scene together or something like that.
Yeah,
And you're like,
totally.
whoa.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm definitely not, I'm in the grand scheme of things, I'm definitely a newbie at this, but like, but yeah, I think there, from at least what I've experienced, like, yeah, there is a very like, I don't know, it's just like a similar mindset, and I feel like comics are like, for me, I'm like, oh, any comic, even if our styles are totally different, even if it's like someone from like a different scene, like across the country, it's like you can instantly like, they're just easy to get along with, or there's like a common thread, which for better or worse, because one time my friend and I like we went to Philadelphia, and we were like, it was like Halloween, and we were like, oh, well, we don't know anybody in the city, let's like do an open mic. And we went to an open mic, and it was like this, just, is it okay if I curse on this?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
this shitty, god awful dive bar, and I mean the comics were great; they were great people, but it was just this shitty dive bar, like 5 people. We're like, oh, this is depressing, and then we stood outside, and people were just in a circle having a conversation about Joe Rogan and DMT, and I was like, this is the same at every open mic in the entire country, like for better or worse. That is like, it's like McDonald's or something, where you're like, I know anywhere I go, this is gonna taste exactly the fucking same. There's like a
Right.
formula to it.
That's crazy, bro. Have you tried DMT? I've always wanted to say that on my podcast, and now I have. That is really, really awesome. Was it so? You said you're from South Carolina. Was it comedy that brought you to Chicago, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was actually it was so I was in North Carolina, and then I was graduated high school, and I was like, my plan was to just graduate high school, chill in North Carolina, like do stand up, and then move to New York in a couple of years. And then a lot of my friends from the comedy scene ended up coming to Chicago to do comedy. Like a whole circle of my best friends. And then I was like, and then after like a couple months of working in a restaurant, I was like, this sucks, I should go to college. And so came to college in Chicago. So it was mostly for the comedy scene, but I'm in my senior year of college right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm still finishing that out.
What college are you at?
I'm at Columbia College Chicago.
Oh, what are you majoring in?
I'm doing like a double major in acting and screenwriting,
Oh,
which
okay.
is, yeah, sort of, I mean, tangentially related to stand up. But the school is great. I mean, it's like an art school, and yeah, I don't know. It's not like a, like I think some people like are like, oh, you're missing out on it if you're in the city because you don't have like a campus and all the sports and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but I'm like mostly in Chicago to do stand up, so it's been a really good fit.
Well, that's good. Well, that's interesting. When because you had said through our emails that you were, in school, and I kind of wondered myself, I said, wouldn't that be kind of bizarre if like the majors were something completely unrelated? Like I'm
Yeah, I'm
dual
like
majoring in
pre-med.
accounting and, tax law. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess I could see that. Chicago's got a really rich comedy history. I mean, some of the comedians that have, I mean, even when you go back to like, I think like the earliest beginnings of like the first season of SNL, and
Mm.
I don't know exactly, but it felt like half that cast was from Chicago. Bill Murray and I think Chevy Chase and a lot of the people who came
Yeah.
through like the Laugh Factory and Second City and
Yeah, I think Second City is like a huge funnel for SNL
yeah,
for sure. Which that's like a whole side of the comedy scene that I'm not really tapped into at all, like improv and sketch and stuff. And I think it's like a totally other skill set. And like there's so many funny people who do that in Chicago, and it's like cool to watch because I'm like, I wouldn't even know how to begin to do that.
right. Well, that brings me to a question I had for you and like working on material. What's usually the process for that? Do you just kind of begin just sort of brainstorming and writing jokes? Is it
It's like so I don't know, like I don't feel like I have like a like like tied down process, just because every time a joke works, it just feels like, oh, like that was probably the last time. That was like a fluke accident. Like I don't know how that happened. And because I'm so like new at this, compared to people who are like who really, really have been, made a career out of this or anything, that I'm like, I'm still kind of figuring a lot of that out. But I like to like free write, even if it's not funny. And then if I go back and read it and I'm like, oh, that's like something. But I feel like a lot of times like something just happens in life and then you're like an offhanded comment in your head and you're like, oh, that's, I should kind of continue down that path. And then I actually sit down and like try to like write it.
Right. Now, is there like, I know it's like, it feels weird. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to ask this, but it's sort of like, you hear a lot of times comedians say that they're sort of like, they'll think of something and they're kind of like, there's a joke there, but I'm not quite sure how to hammer it out correctly or phrase it correctly. Do you
Mm,
ever have kind of one of those you're working on for a while and you sort of try and open mics and see if it's gonna,
totally. And I think like that's something that like that feeling of like, oh, I know why this is funny to me, but I need to get a room of people to see the joke the same way I am. Like I feel like that's something that I'm working on because like I feel like when I like started, I feel like it was more like wordplay or simple things that it's like there's no way to misconstrue this. It's just, a twist of words, whatever, that's funny, versus like it's something that I really admire in like in comedians that I watch is like when they have like a complex idea that they've made funny, when the premise isn't just like when the premise isn't maybe inherently funny. It's like a topic in and of itself or a point in and of itself that I'm like, that's just like a comedy aside, that's a really interesting observation about the world. And then they make that funny. I feel like that's like such a whole nother level that I watch comics do. And like, I feel like that's a big jump that like I would hope to make someday. But
yeah.
like, does that make any sense though? You know what I mean? Where it's
Oh
like,
yeah, 100%. Because there are a lot of times I'll be listening to a comedian and I'll think about a joke they did, especially when it's like a really long setup. The
mm,
punchline at the end is hilarious, and I sort of begin in my head, sort of like reverse engineering the joke. Like, where did this start for you? Okay, you
yeah,
just did this really long joke about something that, just like you said, when you look at it prima facie, isn't funny. But the setup and everything that led up to it, and then boom, drop the punchline, and you're rolling on the ground. Some of those guys
mm,
like Dave Chappelle and Bill Burr are both really, really good at that. Whitney Cummings is too, and I enjoy those comedians. I'm not trying to get off on a tangent. I enjoy
no,
those comedians where they bring up a subject and right away your hair kind of stands on the back of your neck, like, what are you doing? Are
yeah.
you sure you want to go down this path? And they go down the path, and it's hysterical. You know
And
what I
with them
mean?
too, I get the sense of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're
I just,
fine.
I get the sense too that it's like they're not just, and I think there's probably something that comes with doing, I mean, I wouldn't know, but watching them, I feel like, oh, this is probably something that comes with doing stand up 20, 30 years where they're just like, it's just like walking or breathing to them. You know what I mean? Where it's like, if they have a thought, they can put it in the lens of being funny or in being a bit. And I think that versus like, oh, I just had a thought that's funny, so I'll stick to that. Like, no, I have something I want to say and I know how to like do that through stand up. I think that's like such an amazing skill. And I think that's something that like a lot of people's favorite comics do, where you get a sense like, oh, they have like a point they're trying to get across and they're so good at like wielding stand up that they can use it to do that. That was like the nerdiest shit I've ever said, but
No,
wielding
it's
stand up. But you know what I mean? Like, and it's just it's cool to watch because it's like that's my favorite moment watching comics is when it's like I mean, all his personal bullshit aside, not aside, it was horrible. But Louis, as an example, let's say Louis 10 years ago, before anyone knew anything, was like, I just thought it was so cool to like that the peak of his jokes would be like half the enjoyment was from like, oh, that's fucking hilarious, and half the enjoyment was from like, oh, you've put words to this like invisible phenomenon that I didn't even realize I was aware of. Like I felt like he was like decoding the world sort of.
right.
And then he jerked off in front of women, so
Yeah, that was always kind of the weird because for the longest time he was like on my like top five list of most hilarious comics,
yeah.
and some of his stuff was beyond genius. And I for me, I always love the comedians who are like irreverent, who like just don't give a fuck about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget one of his specials that he did. He came out on stage, and when the applause calmed down and everything, he's just like, "So, abortion." And it's
Yeah.
like and just let it like marinate, just quiet, and the whole crowd just kind of like nervous laughter. And to me it was hysterical watching it because you're like, you know what, I'm not even gonna like mess around with this. I'm just gonna go straight at it and just not care. And I think the great things about some of the really great comedians were the people who could take something that shouldn't be funny and make it
Mhm.
hysterical. You know,
Yeah.
there are some bits that I've seen where, you know, like we were talking earlier, when you look at like the kind of jokes that you can't relate to another person without sounding like an asshole. You can't be
Mhm.
like, oh man, Dave Chappelle, man, he did this great bit about Michael Jackson pedophilia. It was hilarious.
Yeah, or like that
You
could
know?
never come up in like a conversation or something that has to
Right.
have this
Yeah.
artifice of, yeah. That reminds me too what you said about Louis and the starting with abortion. Did you ever have you seen that clip of him talking? He's giving like not a eulogy, but he's giving like a speech about George Carlin after he died.
No.
Yeah, it's such a cool clip where he's I constantly feel like I should preface this with like I'm not endorsing Louis C.K. or anything, but I mean I'm really nobody, so who gives a fuck? But oh, but it's this great clip where like he's talking about listening to George Carlin and how he put out an hour like every year, and how Louis at this point had been doing like the same hour for like 15 years or something, and he's talking about like if you just throw out all your old material, it forces you to like dig deeper where you're like, you know, like, oh, I talked about my kids. Okay, well, if I scrap that material, then what's below that? And you just get down until you get to like your deepest fears and stuff, which I mean, I'm not saying that from the perspective of having done that or anything, but it was so cool to listen to because then you watch his stand up and you're like, oh, this is someone who's like facing like their shit, I guess.
Mhm.
And then we found out he really didn't face any of his shit. But
Yeah.
but yeah.
Are there for you? Do you kind of like? Do you ever look at anything in particular and be like, "Yeah, that could be funny, but that's probably not something I should talk about," or is it just kind of like, "Yeah, whatever. If it's funny, I'm gonna say it."
Um, if it's funny, I'm gonna say it, but I will say like there are some things that I'm like there are jokes I've done in the past that I probably won't repeat on here, but there are jokes I've done in the past that I've been like, okay, I've like learned more, or I mean, not anything like horrendous, but like,
Right.
but jokes where I'm like, yeah, I don't really feel like doing that anymore just because it doesn't, I don't really know what it like adds to anyone's life. And, or maybe something where I'm like, yeah, that's a funny joke, but I'm probably not the one who should tell it, or like, I don't know. I mean, in general, I think if it's funny, it's funny, but, but, and it's also, it goes hand in hand too, because I think like, if it's something you like the audience will tell you, you know, if it's something that you shouldn't talk about or something that it makes people uncomfortable when you say it, or something that sounds weird coming out of your mouth, even if you're not like a like, you know, morally aware person, it won't land either. So it's not even like, I don't even think it's this like, I think it's actually pretty rare that you'll find a joke that's like, oh, that's funny and it kills, but it's also really fucked up. It's like if it's killing in every room with a lot of different types of people, you've probably found a way to do it appropriately. And if it's not, it's probably upsetting people. Maybe that doesn't work all the time, but I think that's a pretty general rule that like, yeah, the audience will tell you if it's like fucked up unless you're only performing for audiences of shitty people.
Right. Yeah, I guess if you do it a bit on something, the entire crowd just sits there and stares at you, and there's kind of a in the background, and that's all you hear. It's kind of like, okay, maybe that one. But I think some of
You're
the
like, yeah,
true,
I shouldn't have said that. Yeah.
I think like some of the truly great comedians, you know, and we've covered this a couple times there, where it feels like some of the subject matter that they do, you know, you'd think to yourself like that isn't like a, and granted me, I'm not a comedian, but if I were to sit there and be like, you know, if I was, that's not something I would ever do a bit about.
Mm,
But to the ones who are talented and skilled, it's kind of one of those where I sort of feel like there's not a whole lot that's taboo, provided it's done correctly, you know.
yeah.
And some of the grades could really just, and a lot of it was kind of like you were saying, it's funny because it's ridiculous. It's
Mm,
funny because it's out there, and yeah, of course, everybody in the crowd and probably the comedian privately agrees that that's really fucked up and yada yada yada. But they did it so well. I remember, God, I want to say in the '80s, Sam Kinison did this bit about starving children in Africa. Maybe they wouldn't be starving
yeah.
if they moved where food was. You know, it's completely insane. You know, it's a
Yeah. It's like
completely
you'd never say that to
ridiculous
somebody.
concept. But you know, a lot of it, and it kind of brings me to the next question I had for you, is that he was one of those people, obviously taken before his time, but who was sort of a master in his own physical appearance and facial expressions, and sort of being that kind of long-haired, sweaty, angry, yelling guy,
Yeah.
that he could say really ridiculous stuff, and it was absolutely hilarious. So, is there? I again, I don't know how to like ask this question to get what it is I'm trying to ask, but kind of like what I was saying with Sam Kinison and sort of the facial movements and that kind of stuff. Is that any kind of thing you ever work on? Do you ever like do bits in the mirror to like work on timing or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like I think how you carry yourself is like a big thing. Like, I don't know, I like to be like comfortable on stage, and a lot of times for me that means wearing like just like a big shirt and like baggy jeans and kind of looking like a piece of shit because I'm like that feels like funnier to me. And I don't mean that as any judgment of people who like get dressed up and wear like makeup and dresses or a suit or whatever. Like, I think that that works for some people and it works for their style, but for me, like, if I feel like, and it's weird because I talk about sex a lot, but if I feel like it all sexualized by the audience, it distracts me and I can't really do it. I've gone on stage sometimes wearing like a low cut top or a dress and stuff, and it's fine, but I'm just like in my own head about it, and it's like I like I like being kind of like, I don't know. I like kind of like dressing like a piece of shit, and I hope people. I don't know the word that people are gonna think I'm like disrespecting the show or something, or I was like, oh, I'm not gonna dress up for this. But I like, to me, I'm like, I don't know. I'm saying like dirty, gross stuff, so like, I feel like I should look like dirty and gross. It just feels more natural.
Fit the part, right?
Yeah. I also, this is a little bit of a tangent, but what you were talking about earlier with Sam Kinison and those jokes made me think of something that I think also what sometimes gets lost in the conversation about like, oh, is any topic like off limits. I think that like it really depends on what the butt of the joke is too, because I think you can have a joke about any topic without just shitting on, like, for example, like sexist jokes or jokes about sexism. Like, you can have a joke where the butt of the joke is like, haha, women should be in the kitchen, or you could have a joke like about sexism that like you know is making fun of it like as an institution. And I know I'm not like breaking any new ground by saying that, but like but I think that is a big thing too, is it's like I think you can joke about anything, but it's like, who are you really poking fun at? And like, to some extent, like, yeah, obviously the things that people say on stage they don't really mean, but I think sometimes you watch a comic and you're like, I'm getting a little bit of your worldview.
Yeah.
Like, you watch like Nick DiPaolo or something and it's like, okay, but you don't do that act on stage and then go out and like volunteer at a rape crisis center or something. Like, that's kind of the guy you are. So I think it's a little bit of both. Like, but then like Anthony Jeselnik, I started listening to his podcast and he's like, oh, sorry, I have a pet rabbit and he's getting into stuff. And he's like, his jokes are so dark, but then you listen to him talk and he's like, seems like the nicest guy in the world and is very like, he doesn't have this kind of like, oh, fuck PC culture, I just want to piss everybody off. And I think people who kind of have that like, I don't know, sort of like hard on for offending people are like, it's usually actually not very funny. It's like, it's kind of just like so boring. I'm like, oh, you just want to do like hack racist jokes? Like, yeah, people have been doing that since the 80s. Like, it's not really like edgy or cool. It's just kind of like lame and like telling about you as a person, I think. But
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's sometimes it feels like there's almost for some comedians there's like an image thing, and there's almost like a pressure to uphold a certain image. You know what I mean? And there are times you wonder with some people if that wasn't an image that they sort of cultivated when they were younger, and as they grew up they kind of grew up out of being that person, but there's still that pressure to like maintain that image that they've had for so long that got them famous to begin with.
Well, and especially if that becomes commercially viable, you're like, why would I give this up? That's like who I am. That's like my brand. Like, that's got to be a scary thing to step out of that, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah.
I say as someone with no commercial success.
Well, to me, it was always so bizarre, especially with the whole Bill Cosby situation. Because when I was a kid, this is how old I am, I had an audio cassette of one of Bill Cosby's stand-ups. And I used to sit and listen to that thing all the time. It was so hysterical. And of course, he was one of these guys who, throughout his career, billed himself as the wholesome family, the sort of GPG rated, comedy,
Yeah.
and he was always ragging on comedians who would use foul language and stuff like that. I mean, he'd get really like self-righteous and angry about it.
So funny now, but
Yeah, and lo and behold, we find out he was just roofing everybody, and it's like, okay, so I guarantee most of those comedians you were picking on who were swearing weren't doing that. So
yeah.
that's what I guess I always think this is interesting to ask any comedian, if you were to list like your favorite comedians, like the ones you love to listen to, the ones you really.
Ooh. Um, Mark Maron. I love Mark Maron. Doug Stanhope.
Hmm.
Maria Bamford. Morgan Murphy. Morgan Murphy's album Irish Goodbye. Oh my God. Morgan Murphy all day. And maybe Drew Michael.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not being rude. I'm legit like writing these down. So
Oh no, you're good.
because a couple I haven't heard of, and that like gets me excited because it's like unfound treasure to me. I'm like
Which
Christopher
one? I'm so
Columbus. It doesn't
curious.
it doesn't exist until I find it. So
Yeah.
then it's brand new. Fantastic. The is there what's gosh, I feel bad because it sort of feels like the whole comedy scene, especially the stand-up open mic scene, is really kind of taking a hit with everything with
Yeah.
Corona and everything being shut down and people, trying to open, but does that kind of create a serious lag of just kind of feeling like you're in a holding pattern and just kind of like, okay,
Totally. I've been trying to be really cautious about COVID and stuff. So I'm not doing any indoor shows. Not to talk ill on the clubs. I mean, the clubs that are open right now, I think are being very safe. They're taking all the precautions. They're doing social distancing and cleaning everything and stuff. But I'm just trying to. And I think everyone's being respectful of people's boundaries at this time. If you're just not comfortable doing indoor stuff, but I've done some shows in parks and stuff, and but there's like a good 6 months there where I didn't do a single show, and it was weird because I mean I'm not unique in this. Everyone's in this situation, but like, and every comic is. But like, I've been doing stand up like every day since I was 16, and then all of a sudden I didn't do it for 6 months in a row, and it was like, I don't know. Sort of for me, I was like, I've been doing this for so young, since I was so young, and like my identity's been tied to it for so long that it's kind of like, oh, who am I without this thing? Like this has been like my whole fucking life, And it's like all my whole circle of friends is from that. It's like what I do every day. So it's like, I, I mean, as much as it sucks, I mean, obviously coronavirus is a horrible tragedy, but just in terms of like social stuff being shut down, I think, oh, I'm so sorry. My phone is going off.
oh, you're
That
fine.
was my alarm to wake up if I didn't. But that tells you how much of a piece of shit I am, as I wasn't going to wake up until right now. But that I think hopefully the one good thing to come out of this is like, because you see so many jokes that are like, I don't know. Let me rephrase that because I don't want to shit on anybody. But I think it can become, at least for me, a little bit like incestuous. I'm so sorry, this fucking rabbit. But I think it can become a little bit incestuous where it's like, if all you do is stand up, then all you have to talk about is stand up. And that's not really super interesting, I think, on the whole. Not that there aren't good jokes about it. But I think hopefully something cool out of this will be like that if people don't have stand up, that you have to like be alone with your thoughts and be kind of self-reflective and be like, who am I outside this thing? And hopefully my hope is that when people come back, I think we'll all have like a little bit more, I don't know, maybe more unique voice. That sounds cheesy, but you know what I mean? If you spent time to like reflect on yourself, like hopefully that makes you like a better artist in some respect. That was a very
Yeah.
long-winded explanation, but
No, I get it. I just, I'm always of the mindset of the thought of being alone with my thoughts is one of the most terrifying things in the world.
oh
It's
yeah,
sort
it
of like,
sucks ass. It makes you want to kill yourself, right?
right. Sometimes I'm thankful I have podcasts and have jobs and have a million hobbies and wife and kids, and they keep me distracted because in those few minutes where it's quiet, I don't know what the hell to do.
You're
I
like,
just
oh
like,
no, that's me. Oh
yeah, yeah,
no,
the
I'm
crushing
gonna start like
reality.
crocheting or something. That's not me. That's horrific.
To take up woodworking or something to
Yeah.
work the anger out. Um, what was it? Is there like a big difference for you in terms of like we had talked before about being in a shithole, and I completely understand that. But to me, it always feels like there's a huge difference between a small crowd and a big crowd. Does that
Mm.
have any effect on your performance or how you're feeling throughout the show? If it's like one thing where it's like 12 people or where it's like a couple hundred?
I was gonna say, what do you mean by small crowd? Because I've played for like 2 people before, and that sucks out. I did like a show in New York. I was just talking to my boyfriend about this. I did a show in New York where there was like 3 people in the audience, and 2 of them were like Swedish immigrants who didn't speak English, and it was like shit like that. It's like, yeah, that, like you just gotta like talk to those people, I guess. I mean, you're basically just hanging out at that point. That's not really, um, but like if it's a bigger thing, I don't know, because I mean, maybe I'm like, I kind of have like, I can do like a cleaner set or a dirtier set, but in terms of like, maybe you can like be more emotive and bigger and stuff, but like, I don't know. For me, it doesn't really change that much, but I think it's really interesting to watch like bigger comics who like like watching comics how their careers change when they start doing theaters, because that is something that I like obviously can't speak to personally, but like I think it's cool to watch them like like John Mulaney or something, where it's like you listen to his first album and it's a little more like conversational, and by the time it gets to a theater, it's like this big kind of boisterous, like the John Mulaney voice is kind of like built up, and like I think that's so cool to watch because it almost feels like watching someone like watching something get like distilled down to like its purest form, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like it feels like boiling water and then like taking whatever you have left at the bottom. Like I don't know. So that's cool to watch, but I don't know that I'm really like at a point in my career where I've like gotten to experience that big a size disparity. You know, like the biggest show I've done is maybe like 500 people, which to me was fucking huge, but to working comics is like, I mean, I guess I'm kind of working comic, but you know what I mean? To like people who are like playing theaters and shit, it's like, yeah, they wouldn't even remember that night. So
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that I'm like experienced enough to really like have worked out the differences of those. I hope that's not too boring an answer.
No,
But
not
it's
at
honest.
all. For me, it was always kind of bizarre, and not from a comedy sense, but I used to, when I was in college, I was a history major in college.
Oh, cool.
And I do a lot of like, I don't know if you'd call it like history shows, but sort of like talks or I almost like lectures, even though I didn't have a PhD or anything.
Mm.
And there were times where I did it in front of crowds of a couple hundred people, which for me was, for whatever reason, was way more comfortable because I feel like it just becomes a faceless mass I'm talking to.
Oh,
Rather
that's
than,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
there were times where it was really unsettling, where I'd be like 5 people, and you sort of, to the point where it's so quiet, like they could literally cough and interrupt you, or sort of be like,
Yeah.
they'd actually feel comfortable enough to stop you mid sentence and be like, yeah, I had a quick question about that. And you'd be like, I'd be looking at my cards like, no, bro, you can't do that. You're fucking up my whole flow. You
I
know what I
totally
mean?
get what you mean. Where you're like, yeah, there's like this kind of like tipping point where they become like a group rather than just a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, God, I'll never forget this day. This was probably about 8, 9 years ago. I don't know, but I got contacted by this woman via email wanting to know if I could come speak to her association and give a history on women during the Civil War. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So she gives me the address and I show up, and it's this lady's house, and her association was 7 80-year-old women sitting at her kitchen table having tea. And I was just supposed to sit at the head of the table and give this talk. And it was just like, I don't think I'd ever been so uncomfortable in my entire life. They were all sweet. They were wonderful people, but they would like interrupt me middle of it. Like, do you want more sugar? And I'd be like, I was, damn it, what note card was I on? It was so
Dude,
unsettling
you
to
should
me.
do stand up. You know so much about comedy, and you sounds like you've already done like hell gigs on the road. So you're like basically there. That's so
Well,
funny.
I
I've
get,
definitely had gigs like that.
I've had people say that to me before, and I say, you know what? My reaction is always, and my response is always, I'm not funny. I'm humorous. I was raised too well to be funny. Like maybe it's just a personal joke. Like, I don't have enough trauma in my past to be funny. I can be humorous at times, but
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, you also see people though who are like grew up like fucking, Mormon and homeschooled and all this shit where like they didn't really have like a, I don't know. I think sometimes people get like oh, I have to be like I feel like some people are like, oh, I have to be fucked up. And so then they like make themselves fucked up, and it's like you didn't make yourself funnier, you just like became a drug addict. Like you didn't need to do that. Just like be funny. Like it's not that complicated, but I don't know.
Well, and it's not authentic. Like you can tell the comedians who are
Yeah.
trying really hard to be bizarre and be out there on purpose, rather than that just being their sense of humor.
Mm.
And you get somebody who's like, I've seen it before and heard it, where somebody's like, "Gosh, I want a comedian," especially when you get those like, God, I don't want to rag on anybody, but sort of like those emulators. Like, I mean, you get that comedian who's like desperately wants to be Joe Rogan, or they desperately want to
Or
be
even like
like,
every white man in America. Yeah.
yeah, it's a bro code thing. I'll be the first to admit, and it's really really interesting, and it's always then even more interesting when later in life they become successful,
Hmm.
not doing that. It's almost kind of like,
Yeah.
and
I was gonna say like I won't even like not that this is what you're doing, but I won't even knock people who are like I don't know. I feel like I've done that a lot too. Like especially when I was really really early on, is like that's kind of how you start is by emulating people because you're like, oh, I want to do what these people do, so I'm gonna kind of. I mean, obviously you don't want to be like stealing people's jokes or some shit, but like I think that's really, at least for me, it felt like really normal where it's like, hey, you start off with other people's voice, and then you kind of do that a little bit, and then after a while you're like, oh no, here's now I kind of see where I fit into this thing. But I
mhm.
think a lot of people do that where you start off like kind of emulating someone else until you like realize what you actually want to do.
Well, I guess in a way it does kind of give you a launch off point, like especially when you don't really know comfort level wise, just like you said, where you fit in the grand scheme of things, and,
Mm.
and that kind of stuff. I guess, yeah, I could definitely see that.
And I bet
Uh,
early on too, people you don't really realize you're doing it because you're just like,
mhm.
oh, well, I watch stand up. I like stand up. So I'm going to do stand up. And then you kind of realize, like, oh, well, that was kind of like this person's thing. And like, you start to listen to more stuff and you're like, oh, there's like a whole range of like, I don't know.
I was trying to remember. I got such a kick out of this. Gosh, I don't know if you've ever watched The Marvelous Miss Maisel. If you've ever watched that
I've
show on
seen a
Amazon.
couple episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the comedian in there who was like one of the very few actual historically accurate figures who was
Oh,
in that.
was it Lenny Bruce? He's in
Lenny
there, right?
Bruce.
Yeah.
Lenny
Yeah.
Bruce. And I had never heard of Lenny Bruce before until we watched the show.
Mm.
And then was surprised to find out that he was an actual real person, which shows how like historically I am up on comedians, because apparently I'm told that comedians just know this guy, that he's like one of the original like godfathers of stand-up comedy. And my wife and I got on YouTube and looked him up, and it was amazing how many of his bits we found, and how many of his bits were absolutely hysterical. And you're talking 70 years later.
Yeah.
7 years later, you're listening to this guy do stand up, and you're like, oh my god, that is like, I could see why he was. But there's something interesting there that's sort of like transcendent about comedy, that it can sort of like reach over time and stuff, that it I think, because a lot of comedy speaks to the human condition. Like,
Yeah.
so something can be funny at one point in time and definitely still be funny a year, a decade, 70 years later.
Yeah, like even like Abbott and Costello when they had like Who's on First, and I was like, I don't know, going through like a big comedy nerd phase where I was like, I need to listen to everything and I need to know the history of this and I like listen to one of their old albums and it's like fucking hilarious. Like it's like I mean, there's some stuff where I'm like, okay, it's not quite as like maybe like a belly laugh as I would get now, just because I think if you listen to so much like you said like Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neill, you're like, okay, I'm a little like desensitized to this shit, but it's like, yeah, they're like it's crazy because I don't know. I kind of think I just assumed like, oh, well, that stuff's gonna be outdated and I'm not gonna enjoy it. But it's like, and it's like some like old stand up. I feel like it's like because it didn't feel like as much like shock value, or the shock value is so like, and she showed her pearls, and you're like, yeah, that's not surprising to me. But it's so like clever and witty, and I don't know. It's cool to go back and old stand up, and you're like, oh, they were like real people that
Yeah.
had like real thoughts and feelings.
Excuse me. Yeah, he did. God, he did this bit. I don't remember what it was called, but it was like the basic concept of, he was doing this routine where he was pretending he was having a house party, and an African American man shows up, which he wasn't expecting. And the whole like basis of the bit is trying so hard to consciously not be racist that you're coming off as racist, you
That's funny.
know?
That could be written today. Yeah.
100%. That's why my wife said, she's like, you can update just a little bit of the language and do that bit today, and it
Also,
would
like
kill.
horrifically sad that you're like,
Yeah.
oh, a racial joke from 1950. Yeah, that holds up. That's
Right.
horrific.
I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, we really suck, don't we? Okay. So, what's you said you're going to school for acting and screenwriting. If you had your druthers, like in terms of career trajectory, where would you rather end up, writing like the biggest hit sitcom in the world, or on the road doing stand up to, I don't have a word there.
Stand up definitely my thing. Stand up definitely my end goal. I like want to do stand, and it just seems like there's kind of like you have to do other stuff to like make money, and like I would love to like write for a show or something, and like that would be really cool. But stand up is like, if I could like only do stand up, I'd be very happy.
That yeah, because then you get to be like the person that people know is the funny one, and not the, I always think that's funny when, especially when any kind of sitcom, and you think to yourself like, oh yeah, so and so, they're really funny, it's like, okay, are they funny because they're not the one writing the script? The one writing the script is funny. Of course, obviously they have the talent, have to have the talent and the skill to, give the timing and everything to nail that. But that's really, really cool.
I think stand up is just, I mean, I've never written a show or anything, but stand up is just like so immediate, and there's not kind of this like I don't know, if you think of something, then like that night you can go up and say it and get a reaction, and like I think that's like a fun process.
Yeah.
And it seems like a show would be a little more like you write it and then you film it and then you wait months for it to come out and then the reviews and shit, and like, although also who the fuck am I though to be like, yeah, I don't really like TV's not really my foray. Like obviously if I got a chance to do anything I would jump on it and be like so grateful, but yeah.
Yeah, if Lauren Michaels called right now and said, hey, we need you to start writing next season.
Yeah, I wouldn't be like, actually, on James Finch show, I said that I wouldn't do stand-up, so I don't know why you haven't listened to that.
Yeah, but I'm not going to be a sellout, man. That's really good. So what's next on the horizon? Is it just kind of waiting for COVID
a vaccine
to clear up by 2025 or something? And
yeah, I'm really trying to be careful and only do outdoor shows right now, which I mean sucks and is really hard, but yeah, I mean I'm trying to like, I don't know, I'm trying to write a pilot right now. I'm trying to write a screenplay and just like have stuff under my belt and like do other things. And yeah, I mean hopefully stand up comes back sooner rather than later, but I have no idea. I'm thinking about starting making rugs. I'm just really making rugs, baking bread. I'm turning into like an 80-year-old woman, but
getting really into bonsai trees or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where my life's headed right now.
Am I allowed to ask what the pilot's about, or is that under lock and key yet?
Oh, sure. I mean, I don't. I might be not supposed to because I'm trying to pitch it somewhere, so maybe. But it's I'm writing like an animated show, so maybe I'm being too precious about this, but I don't know. I've never been in this situation before, so I don't want to get anybody upset. But yeah, I the pilot is like based off a character that I used to do, and yeah, I don't know. We'll see if it turns into anything. I mean, I don't really know how this world works because I'm very new to like the actual like kind of, I don't know, industry side of it.
Am I allowed to ask what the character is that you used to do?
Yeah, it's just like a kind of like disgusting old lady who curses a lot. I think I can say that pretty safely. Yeah.
Are we talking like filthy urine smelling old cat lady kind of thing, or?
No, not like a creepy, more just a like Jewish grandma kind of a doesn't give a fuck. Yeah.
Was this is this from life experience, or was it just generated content?
The more just generated, yeah. And it's still, I don't know, it's still a work in progress. I probably, yeah.
Okay, I'll stop asking about it because.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna look back on this in a year and be like, "You fucking idiot! You could have said anything about it. Who cares?" But I truly don't know. Like, I don't know how it works pitching a show, what I'm allowed to say. So I just want to be on the safe side.
I understand that completely. Well, I want to, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. Anytime you're like you're doing something like this, and I don't know, a lot of times I try to like put myself in other people's shoes, because you just get like randomly contacted from somebody you don't know who's asking you to come on their show and bear your words and whatever, and take time out of your day. I'm the kind of person where I like to think I'm the kind of person who would gladly accept, like, oh, cool, you want me to be a podcast? Hell yeah, I'll do that. In my mind, I'm like, I don't want to be bothered with that shit. And yet on the other hand, I'm emailing people all the time, like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? Hey, you want to come on my podcast? And then I get mad. I'm like, oh, everybody's ghosting me. What the? So.
Dude, I'm so down for it. Thank you for having me. This is fun. I'm always down to yeah, it was really cool to like talk about comedy and stuff. It's a
Well,
blast.
I'm really really hoping that we can get to a point where we can get back to normal. I keep being told that there is no returning to normal, but I certainly hope there is, because it felt like the greatest tease in the world where the very first night in my entire life I got to go to a comedy club, and like 2 days later the country shut down.
It's so
You know,
cool.
it sort of feel like you finally got to check something out that was really really cool and awesome, and it was something I remember leaving that night looking forward to being like, man, we got to do this on a regular basis. Like every time we got a date night or a night where the kids got a sitter, we got to get out and get to a comedy club, because it was such an absolute blast. So I'm hoping we get to that point, for your sake, career wise, for a lot of people's sake, career wise, for my sanity sake wise. And yeah, I'm hoping we can get to a point where I can, yeah, catch you on stage again, because we're really, really looking forward to it. So,
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is a blast. I'm definitely uh, looking forward to it too, for everyone's sake.
okay.
So stay
Well,
safe.
yes, social distance, hand washing, all that stuff, the new catchphrases. Okay. All right. Well, bye, Maddie. We'll see you
Bye.
later.
Thanks so much.
You bet.